Hello, I'm Dennis Neal, in for Steve, and now we've got a great guest joining us, Michael Bastasch. I might have pronounced that just a little bit differently moments ago, but don't worry about that. Joins us now, and he is a columnist for the Daily Caller, and we're going to be talking about the greenies and fear mongering. Hello, and thanks for being with us, Michael.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so some people out there say that the climate change movement's advocates are getting increasingly desperate and a little more shrill. Now, you have actually taken a closer look at this 97% claim, the claim that 97% of all scientists believe that global warming is happening and that it's a crisis requiring immediate intervention. I happened to read a great article in the Wall Street Journal the other day, also doing a great job of disassembling and just devastating this claim. Tell us what you found.
Well, the 97% claim is a great talking point for President Obama, but it really doesn't hold up to strict scrutiny. When you actually break down the numbers and dig into it, you find that the so-called consensus that they have is only something like 0.5%. Very few scientists from the published literature that they looked at agree that global warming is going to be catastrophic. Most of the scientists simply agree that the Earth is warmed and humankind has played some role in that. Now, there's disagreement over to what extent, but very, very few scientists say, it's mostly induced by humans and it's going to be catastrophic.
Yes. Now, the article I had read traced this claim to several different studies and claims. And in one case, a university student and her advisor or teacher or something merely did a 2-question interview online, and they zapped it out to scientists, and then 3,100 scientists answered back. It was just 2 questions. One was, do you think the Earth is heating up? And the other question was, do you think that man has anything to do with that? Never even asked whether it's urgent crisis, what should be done about it. And out of the 3,100 scientists, there were like 75 or something, I don't know, climate scientists, and 97% of that small group of 75 came out and agreed with both questions. And from that came a lot of these claims that 97% of climate scientists believe in global warming. Why haven't President Obama and Secretary of State John Kerry begun to sort of step back from that 97% canard?
Because if you keep saying something enough, eventually people start believing it. And it's, very, very few people ever challenge them on that. And, it's not about whether or not scientists actually agree on this. It's more about power and advancing their own regulatory agenda. They can't afford to come back and say, well, fewer scientists agree than we thought, because they're pushing forward these huge regulations on power plants that, could, in effect, kill the coal industry in the United States.
Yeah, I think that that is one of the last nails in the coffin for coal. They hope it will be. I was kind of surprised to see the Obama administration come out with its latest broadside on the whole climate change thing, because it's now getting ready to try to impose these emissions caps on factories or utilities. And yet in 2012, we had carbon emissions fall to 1992 levels, to 20-year lows, because so many utilities switched to nat gas simply because it was cheaper than coal.
Yeah. And, if you look at the historical record, you find something really interesting, is that the carbon intensity of the economy has been decreasing rapidly. Years before the EPA came in, years before we started looking at carbon emissions, simply because we're getting more efficient. When the economy grows and businesses find ways to cut costs and get more out of every energy unit they use. So we're producing more per unit of energy, meaning the carbon intensity of our economy is actually going way, way down. And this has been happening for decades, and you'll see it continue to happen for decades regardless of whether or not we have an EPA.
Yes, and it's because often the free market is an awfully good fix. When nat gas is cheaper than coal, you switch to nat gas, which releases lower emissions. And yet the green movement, the climate change guys, they're just as biased against nat gas, which could be the answer in the U.S. to energy independence, at least for the next 20 years easily. But they're so against it ideologically that they refuse to kind of go for the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, but, this thing is not about just going after coal. Natural gas, oil, you name it, they're all next. They're all next in line. Coal is the first, then they're going to go after oil and gas again. All about getting rid of fossil fuels.
Right.
These are the same people, the same ideas that were being peddled around the 60s and 70s have just carried over and adopted climate change as their new banner.
Yes. Now, I've been a little startled by just how shrill the climate change advocates have become. This use of the word denier to talk to about anyone who has any doubts at all that climate change is an imminent crisis. This phrase denier that usually is applied to people who deny that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. Well, now they call climate change deniers, which is clearly a loaded way of going after them. And then there's this story of the scientists, you might have wrote about this, yes you did, scientists about this UN panel. It's the premier panel, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The very fact that they have climate change in the title makes me think that they've got an axe to grind, and that is to stoke the fears of climate change. And scientists have been under pressure like never before to toe the line and agree with the climate change fearmongers.
Exactly. And, the IPCC that you said, climate change is in their title, but not only that, their mandate is to record the human impacts on the climate. So if, their whole mandate, the reason they exist is to record human impacts
and search for that.
In climate. So they're completely, so there automatically is a bias towards
yes.
Pumping up the alarm of
right.
global warming. But, even more startling is that, today there was a testimony in the House Science Committee where economist, University of Sussex, Richard Toll, went on the record, and he said, this isn't necessarily uncommon for it to happen. It's happened numerous times, and scientists and academics who have dissenting views are often sidelined or put in positions where they can't threaten
right.
what the minority
They're
of
marginalized.
Actually think.
Well, I mean, have we not learned from Copernicus? Wasn't Copernicus the guy who insisted that the Earth traveled around the sun, not the sun around the Earth, and he was widely trashed for it?
Yeah, and it wasn't until later we thought that we found that out.
Yes, exactly. Some years ago, my entire view of the global warming crisis was changed by a plane ride I had. I sat next on an airliner. I sat next to an ExxonMobil executive who was involved in a lot of this stuff. And he just pointed out something I'd never thought of before. He said, don't you realize the motivation for people who are selling this global warming crisis? Of course, they later had to change the phrase from global warming to climate change because the Earth actually is cooler now than it was in the peak year of 1998. But he said, I said, what motive? They're worried about the Earth. They want to save the Earth. What are you talking about? He said, no. If you're a climate change or a global warming activist, the fact is by selling fear, you end up bringing in more donations for Greenpeace, let's say. And also, if you're a scientist studying climate change and global warming, by predicting crisis, you end up getting more grant money. You end up getting more headlines. You're feathering your own career by doing this. I never thought before that the greenies actually had a profit motive, in essence, to stoke this as an imminent crisis.
Yeah, and you're leaving out also Al Gore and the likes of him who have, millions of dollars in renewable energy investments and all sorts of green efficiency, green building investments that
yes.
would see those tumble, lose all their value if all of a sudden the U.S. just said, we're not going to do anything about global warming.
Yeah, Al Gore, who, while lamenting an inconvenient truth, while warning us that glaciers are melting into the sea, Al Gore then agrees to sell his current TV cable channel for $500 million, and I believe Al Gore personally pocketed $100 million of that. He sells it to Al Jazeera TV, which is owned by the government of Qatar in the Middle East, and the government of Qatar in the Middle East presides over some of the biggest nat gas production in the entire world. How is it that Al Gore could end up selling out his TV channel to a bunch of polluters?
It's because he cares more about money than he does the planet, just like a lot of these people. A lot of these people are businessmen, they're snake oil salesmen. They want to sell us these solutions that, if you really think critically about global warming or climate change, and, if you believe it's a problem, you should sit down and look at these solutions. And, none of them make really any sense. How will switching to 100% renewables make us any better off and protect us from global warming.
If the planet is indeed
it will find
warming.
out renewables are just as dirty,
yes,
to use their own language, as fossil fuels.
Yes, and the wind, the whole wind energy thing, my God, it's killing millions of birds. And the greenies aren't worried about the birds. Let them die, I guess. Well, now the last leg here. We got about a minute or so left here. And let's talk about this plan by the Obama administration, the president once again doing by executive order what Congress won't do, what even his own party won't do. The Democrats in Congress some years ago refused to go along with his push for a cap and trade plan. The idea of let's first cap how much companies can release into the air, but then let's start selling credits for exceeding that limit, and those credits will trade back and forth, which of course will be a boon for Wall Street, but which also will be a boon for the government because it will tax all of that trading. And do you think that they're going to be able to persuade the states to go ahead and start doing cap and trade on their own when Washington itself wouldn't do it?
Yeah, the states that are fighting this, they're not going to persuade. They're going to try to force them to do it as best they can. But, it's just amazing. It's almost Orwellian that they're selling this as, a more flexible option to what they had before. I hate to see what they were considering otherwise. But, it's anything but flexible, and what it's essentially doing is a way to backdoor, kill coal, and tax energy.
I hadn't seen it as a backdoor way to further kill coal. Well, cap and trade certainly has not worked very well in Europe. There's been some success with climate credits where companies are trying to hedge against that. And of course, California, Tesla, the electric car maker, ends up making more money trading these California pollution credits and selling them to car makers that really do pollute, more money than it makes selling its own cars. So government gets involved instantly. It just kind of distorts the entire nature of business. Thanks for being with us today. Good job, Michael Bastasch. And up next, Malmsbury panel is back, plus former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See. We're going to talk about Pope Francis right here on the Steve Malmsbury Show with me, Dennis Neal. We'll be right back.